NYU recently announced a stunning gift: free med school tuition for every single person that walks through its doors. How could I possibly have anything critical to say whatsoever about such a generous gift? Here's a couple things. First off, NYU is trying to reduce its class size consistently over the past several years so that they would be able to right-size that amount of students for the gift that they were getting so that they could announce this. Second, NYU wants to be the top-ranked medical school in the country, which I guess that makes sense. I mean, that's a good goal to have. But one of the goals behind this is to increase the average MCAT score. So you can get a lot more people walking through the door that have basically the best of the best credentials, which are going to help increase that ranking. And you can do that if you have free med school tuition. Imagine the kind of applications that NYU is going to get now for their medical school class. It's going to be insane, the qualifications of the people that are trying to go there. And that's exactly what they want. Now, another thing to think about with NYU is also consider this. With the PSLF program, if you do not get living expenses covered in New York City, you might still leave with $150,000 of debt instead of $500,000 if you were having to borrow for tuition as well. Now, if that's the case, $150,000 versus $500,000 under the PSLF program, you pay based on your income. So during residency and fellowship, you're paying $300 to $500 a month, regardless of if you owe $150 or $500K. Right? And then on top of that, you also have the situation where you're paying, your payments cap out at no more than the standard 10-year plan. So for $150,000 as an attending, you're capping out your payments at $1,500 a month approximately, no matter how much you owe. And as an attending, with $500,000 of debt, you might be paying something like a similar amount, frankly, depending on what kind of position you go into. Now, who is going to be attracted by this gift, free medical school tuition? People who have really, really high MCAT scores very seldom go into primary care. I mean, it's just a fact of life. We know this. I mean, if you have very, very high scores, it's just cultural that you would go into the most prestigious specialties. And NYU is no exception to this rule. So really, I think that if they were really trying to increase the number of primary care doctors, which is the stated purpose of this gift, or at least one of them, that more people would want to go into primary care, then frankly, you have to dedicate this gift to people who go into primary care. You can't just say free med school tuition, because guess what? The primary care doctor who graduates with $150,000 from living expenses going to NYU is still going to have to pay back $150,000, whereas somebody who goes into private practice as an orthopedic surgeon is going to be able to pay that off in a couple months, or a few months perhaps, right? So unless you had a gift for free med school tuition and living expenses, specifically for people who go into primary care, and you could structure it as a loan that gets forgiven after 3 years of service in a primary care specialty, then that would actually achieve the purpose. That would actually meet the social goals of what NYU was announcing. But in reality, I view this cynically. I view this as nothing more than a PR move by NYU to attempt to climb the rankings for medical schools. Now, if you look at other NYU programs, such as their law school, their dental school, other programs that they have there, they charge some of the highest tuition anywhere in the country. And I've had a lot of people that express extreme frustration at the different things that they were told in their admissions for different programs throughout NYU outside of the medical school. I do not want to impugn the motives of any donors or anything like that. I think this is a wonderful thing that they're trying to do. But the problem is you have a bunch of old people that are designing this program, not taking into account the realities of current student loan forgiveness rules that exist in the country today. So for your NYUs out there, this is really designed to climb the rankings, to try to beat Harvard, to try to beat Johns Hopkins, and I do not really believe in the PR statement that said this is designed to help create more primary care doctors. So if you have a bunch of med school debt, we're experts in figuring out PSLF and other programs, so feel free to reach out to us if you had any questions with the contact button on our website, studentloanplanner.com. I wanted to show you a specific example of what I mean by the PSLF program making it so that NYU's gift of free med school tuition might actually not even mean all that much. So let's assume that a NYU grad recently left medical school, just graduated in 2018 with $500,000 of student loan debt of tuition plus living expenses in New York City. So $500,000 of med school debt. We'll say that they're eligible for everything. They're going for the PSLF program. They're single. And we will assume that the prior year, in 2017, before 2018, they made $0 because they were still in school. And then for tax year 2018, we'll say that they made $30,000 because they were a resident for half of the year. In 2019, we'll say they made $60,000. and so we'll say they made $60,000 until in 2022. We'll say they finished their 4-year residency program, and let's say they become an OBGYN. So let's say they make about, we'll just say $250,000, and we'll say half of the year they were making $30 as a resident, and half of the year they were making $125 as an attending. So that's a $155,000 salary. And then finally, when they're an attending, they make $250,000. So if this is the case, then we can go here and see that the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program would result in this doctor paying $122,000, $122,036 specifically. So that's over 10 years, and then the forgiven balance of $727,000 would be forgiven tax-free. Now, if we go to the Calculations tab, we can see on this spreadsheet the monthly payment on the Pay-As-You-Earn program for the 10 years while they're going for PSLF. So if you multiply these numbers by 12, and each one of them, and to make it annualized, and then sum them up over 10 years, then you would get the amount that you would be paying on the PSLF program, right? So what happens? So we saw that the cost to PSLF with $500,000 of debt is about $122,000. Now, what happens if the same exact person went to NYU starting this year and has no debt of any kind from tuition? This doctor would still need to borrow to pay living expenses because that's not included in the scholarship. So if that's the case, then living expenses for 4 years in Manhattan, what would it be? Well, you'd assume that it would be at least $30,000 because rent alone is kind of maybe close to that. So say they have a roommate, say they kind of cautious with their expenses, but they still have some stuff they spend their money on. They go on some trips. So we'll say $30,000 a year from actual borrowing. And then since it's over 4 years and the interest accrues, they don't get subsidized interest, we'll say that the total 4-year sum ends up being about $150,000. So $150,000, not $1.5 million, $150,000 of debt. Same exact story. Just to make the math easy, we'll just pretend that they graduated this year just to show apples and apples. And same exact income, same exact everything. Now, the situation here is both of these physicians are graduating from NYU Med School and working at a not-for-profit hospital. So if we go to the main page, we can see that they would pay a total of $110,140 over 10 years. That would make $144,000 approximately be forgiven at the end of 10 years tax-free. So then the total cost on the PSLF program would be $110,000. Now that is only $10,000 approximately cheaper than with the other scenario of $500,000 in debt. Why is this the case? So recall that under the PSLF program, if you're on the pay-as-you-earn plan, then the payments are capped when you make too much money. So for example, when this OBGYN becomes an attending, her payments get capped at $1,742 a month, which is the standard 10-year plan. So those payments, by the way, do count towards PSLF. So a lot of physicians these days, they go through med school and they do join big, giant, not-for-profit medical networks, right, as physicians. In the case of, in NYU, a lot of people are probably going to be interested in prestigious positions at academic medical hospitals, academic medical centers. So probably at least half of the physicians, I would assume, would be graduating from NYU and going into PSLF eligible jobs. So if that's the case, not only does this hurt in the sense that you're paying almost the exact same amount of money, it's really benefiting people who go into the private sector. For example, in the prior example, let's say we have an orthopedic surgeon who has the $500,000 of debt, so we'll assume that, take another year of residency here, maybe another 2 for fellowship or something, and we'll just say they make, $300,000, we'll just say $400,000 just to, blow it out of the water, right? So if we look at the debt here in this example, they would not be eligible for PSLF. Their cheapest path would be to refinance privately. If we could play with the numbers to make it that. You know what I'm trying to say, basically. Like the private refinancing with $500,000 would cost $621,000, and then if you did $150,000, then you would see that obviously costs $186,000, which is way less. So in this situation, what you'll find is that the reality is that the private sector specialists with this NYU free tuition giveaway are actually going to come out far, far ahead. And your primary care doctors working at not-for-profit health clinics and not-for-profit hospital systems are actually going to pay almost the exact same amount of money that they would pay under either plan because of the public service loan forgiveness program. So in other words, the primary care people in the not-for-profit sectors, they're not even going to get a benefit out of this for the most part because of the PSLF program, because of the fact that the tuition, free tuition is not going to cover living expenses. So really poorly designed program if the goal is to encourage more people to become primary care physicians. It's not taking advantage of government repayment programs. It's very, very inefficient, and in my opinion, is clearly designed to help boost NYU in the rankings for med schools.